Down there, life continues. The traffic is awful, stocks go on trading, and Star Trek is still showing.
good day to you, grade 8 learners. Welcome to today's Natural Sciences lesson brought to you by the Gauteng Department of Education. My name is Dabezinhle Dliwayo, and I hope I find you well and ready and excited to get on our lesson for today. Right. So, in our lesson, we want to look at balance in ecosystems. That is, balance in ecosystems. This is still under the section of life and living, and I'm sure by now we know what ecosystems are. We have covered so much work pertaining to our ecosystems. So let's build and see what we are going to discover in our lesson for today. Right. So we're saying at the end of the lesson, you should be able to explain how an ecosystem is balanced. What kind of balance are we talking about? So we'll explain how our ecosystem is balanced. And number two, we want to list the natural factors that disturb the balance in an ecosystem. So you take note that we can have a balanced ecosystem, then we have things now that we can disturb that balance. And first, we're saying natural factors, right? And then thirdly, we want to list the human factors that disturb the balance in an ecosystem, right? So we shall give examples. Ensure that you take note of these factors. And then we want to explain the impact of an imbalance in an ecosystem. So now when there is an imbalance, what are the results? What happens next when we have an imbalance in our ecosystem? And then we also want to list the different impacts that an imbalance can have on our ecosystem. Right. So we'll explain them and then we list the different impacts. And then last but not least, we want to give examples of the impact of an imbalance on an ecosystem. Right. So this is the center of our lesson, that is balance in an ecosystem. Right. So now we're saying, coming into this lesson, we're building on the knowledge that you have pertaining to your ecosystems. Remember, previously we looked at our food chains and our food webs. And importantly, we noted that the sun is the ultimate source of energy for our ecosystems. Remember that. And we're saying the energy flows from our sun, it is trapped by our producers, right? And then when the producers photosynthesize, we're saying some of the energy now that is stored is going to be eaten by our herbivores. And remember, we're saying the producers, they mark our first trophic level. Then we go to the second trophic level, that is our primary consumers. For example, the herbivore there, they will eat our producers. In turn, our herbivores are going to be eaten by the carnivores, and we're saying our carnivores, when they die, they are going to decompose, and we have some decomposers acting on them. And we're saying that shows the flow of our energy in our food chains and in our food webs. I hope you still remember that section. Right. Now that we understand that section, we want to look at the balance in our ecosystems, right? So we're saying before we do that, we're going to kickstart with a small assessment just to help us to be fully geared for our lesson, right? So as usual, I'm going to give you 5 minutes for you to work on these questions. 5 minutes. Right. Welcome back. Welcome back. I'm sure that you are done. You've completed the task there. Now remember to join us on our WhatsApp platform. That is on 079 578 2908. So you can send your solutions so that we see how much work you are doing there, if at all it is making sense. Now let us look at the questions. Now, the first question was saying, what is a food web? Right? What is a food web? We're saying a food web now is a group of chains, food chains that are actually interlinked in an ecosystem, isn't it? So we have a group of food chains that are interlinked. I hope you still remember our food chains. And we said your food chain should always start with a producer. Okay, I hope you still remember that. And your arrows, they point towards the direction of your consumer. Okay. And then what are the feeding levels in an ecosystem called? What are they called? They are called trophic levels. Remember from our producers, that is the first trophic level. We go to the second trophic level, that is our primary consumers. We go to the third, secondary, and then the tertiary consumers. Right? I believe we were able to get that one. Now, what percentage of energy is available to the next trophic level? I hope you still remember from our previous lesson, we said we only have about 10% of energy which is available to the next trophic level. And the question is, what happens to the energy that is not available to the next trophic level? The 90%, what happens to it? We said this energy is used for the life processes, okay, and it is lost as heat to the surroundings. So remember our life processes, the 7 life processes, movement, and so on, isn't it? So we're saying whenever a consumer eats something, we're saying that food is going to be used for the life processes, movement, excretion, respiration, nutrition, and all those other processes. And then only the 10% is the one that is going to be actually allowed to proceed to the next trophic level. Right. It is important for us to remember these concepts. In our ecosystem, of importance to us is the flow of energy. Right. And as long as we have that consistent flow of energy, it can lead us to a state which we may call our balanced state, which has an impact on our system, right? A very good positive impact on our system, which we want to talk about today. However, we're saying some disturbances can occur, which lead to what we call an imbalance in our ecosystem. So we're going to clarify all those concepts as we progress in our lesson today. Right. So we're going to start by defining a few terms. Ensure that you master these terms. Number one, we start by defining our ecosystem. We're saying our ecosystem is a biological community of interacting organisms and their physical environment. So remember, in all those different kinds of ecosystems we have spoken about, the marine ecosystem, the desert, the savanna ecosystems, you realize that the animals that live there, they have a way that they actually interact together. And we're saying they are interdependent, they depend on each other, isn't it? And we call that our ecosystem. Then we talk of a balanced ecosystem, right? So when we're talking of a balanced ecosystem, take note, this is a self-sustained system, right? If we're saying it is self-sustained, we're saying this system is able to provide for all its organisms. Okay, all the organisms, they get enough, okay, enough food, enough water, enough everything that they require. All right, we'll talk about this shortly. So we're saying it is a self-sustained system of interdependent plants and animals and their physical environment. So take note there the difference between ecosystem and what we call balanced ecosystem. Right? In an ecosystem, organisms are interacting, but it can happen that in their interactions, there may be competition for food and other things because they are limited. In such cases, we say that your ecosystem is not balanced. Okay, but if it is balanced, everyone has got enough. All right, we'll explain it further as we proceed. And then we talk of what we call the carrying capacity. Right, the carrying capacity. This is the number of individuals in a population that an ecosystem can sustain without damaging the environment. So in a specific place, we're saying there is a maximum number of animals that can live in that particular place without damaging the environment. Okay, so if that number is exceeded, then we'll have our imbalance. We'll talk about it more, isn't it? So hence you need to understand the term carrying capacity. Okay, everything is carrying capacity. Think of if you have your cup of water. If it is written 500 mils, it will reach that 500 mils, isn't it? If you exceed it, the water starts to spill, right? So think of it in a similar way. A certain piece of land can actually take care of a certain number of animals. If it exceeds, then the system is not able to take care of those animals. All right. The next term we want to talk about is biodiversity, and simply we are talking about the variety of all living things. That is what we mean by biodiversity. It can be different plants, it can be different animals. When you go into a certain piece of land, what kinds of animals can you see? What kind of plants can you see? All right, and we say that is what we call our biodiversity, right? And then last but not least, we talk of the word extinction, right? Extinction is now the complete disappearance of the species, okay? That can be a plant or animal from the earth, okay? It ceases to exist, all right? I hope you have heard about what is called a dodo bird. It is no longer existing. It has completely disappeared, right? So when we're saying something becomes extinct, it becomes no more, right? Suppose you are left with one individual on earth like that, we are saying that species is now endangered. Okay, if that one, the last one dies, then you cannot go anywhere under the sun and find any of those species of that particular kind. Right. So these are the terms that we'll be dealing with in our lesson for today. Right. Now, as such, I'm going to give you just 2 minutes for you to take down these definitions. Right. Welcome back. Welcome back. Now let us proceed into our business for today. Now we want to talk about balance in an ecosystem. Right. Can you take a closer look at that ecosystem? You can see different populations of animals, and I hope you can tell which kind of ecosystem is that. Right. You can see the different kinds of animals that we have in our ecosystem there. Right. Now, what is important for us to note is that the ecosystem is going to provide different things to all these populations of animals. Right. So, our ecosystem is going to provide, number one, it is going to provide food for the organisms that we have there. And number two, it is going to provide water, right? And also, there is going to be light. Remember, for our producers, they require the light as well as shelter. Right. So we're saying these are the basic provisions from our ecosystem. And we're saying our ecosystem is going to be balanced as long as all these provisions are enough for all the animals that we have in our ecosystem. I hope that makes sense. So remember from what we said previously, okay, the energy distribution, the energy flow in our ecosystem was saying at the bottom of our pyramid there, we have our producers, and we said our producers have to be more than the next trophic level, right? Because we're saying only 10% of the energy that will be in the producers there is going to be taken to the next level, that is the primary consumers, right? So take note that in a balanced ecosystem, we're saying there has to be enough food for the primary consumer, for the secondary consumer, as well as the tertiary consumer. Everyone has to have enough food, enough water. That is including the producers. They should have enough water. They should have enough light. And they should have enough shelter. And then we can say our ecosystem is balanced. Now, if it happens that there is not enough food, for example, for the primary consumers, then we say that there is no balance now in our ecosystem. In other words, you can have a few number of producers than our primary consumers. And what does that lead to? It leads to competition because we are saying there is not enough food for our consumers. Therefore, they will end up what? Competing for food, for water, and even for shelter. And that is the situation whereby we are saying we have an imbalance in our ecosystem. Right. I hope that makes sense. Think of a situation whereby there are more snakes than the rats. What will happen? Plenty snakes than the rats. You understand? So it means the snakes will have to compete for the what? For the rats. It's quite an interesting concept that we'll be dealing with there, but we'll see it as we progress with our lesson. Right. So now we're saying there is a number of factors that contribute now to the imbalance or that upset the balance of our ecosystem. And these factors, we can classify them into two. As we remember them from our objectives, we have what we call natural factors and also human factors. Right. So now we want to start by looking at natural factors that can cause an imbalance in our ecosystem. Remembering that our imbalance is a situation whereby we're having our consumers being more than our producers, right? And then resulting in some competition, right? So below there we have a list in the form of pictures, right? I want you to discuss with the person next to you. Identify, first of all, identify each of those factors. Just name it. What factor is that? And then, secondly, I want you to actually discuss on how these factors can contribute to an imbalance in our ecosystem. And remember, we're saying when we're having an imbalance, we don't have enough of shelter, we don't have enough of water, we don't have enough of what? Of food, enough of light. So we're saying each of these factors, how then do they contribute to that imbalance? I hope you get the question, right? And for that, I'm going to give you 3 minutes. Okay, welcome back. Welcome back. Remember, again, we're saying join us on our WhatsApp platform 079 578 2908. Okay, so you can send your solutions, your concerns. If you're having challenges, just point them out. Say, I'm having challenges in this section. Right, now let's go over these factors. Remember, we're saying these are what we call our natural factors, and I'll remind you as our objectives, you should be able to list them. All right, so let's first identify them together. You can go over your solutions and check if you got them or not. All right, so the first factor that causes an imbalance in our ecosystem is a fire. All right, right, fire or wildfires. Okay, we're saying they fall under natural factors as well as human factors. We shall meet it again. Right. uh, so fires, they do disturb our ecosystem, and I believe you had a discussion on how that may be. Okay, we'll talk about it shortly. And then there we are looking at, it's a very sad situation for farmers there. Right, when you're looking at those crops, it reminds us of something that is drought. Okay, drought. We're saying droughts or drought seasons, they have an impact on our ecosystems and they upset the balance of our ecosystem. Right. When you look at that, obviously we can see that is a volcano, right? I'm sure we're familiar with the volcanoes, right? Looking at volcanoes, we'll put there an umbrella term for there's so many processes, so many things that can happen around us that can disturb our ecosystems, like the volcanoes, okay? And we'll call these unusual events. Let's just call them unusual events like volcanoes. They do not erupt every day. It's events that can happen, just unusual events, cyclones, earthquakes, and other things like that. Those unusual events, they can actually cause an imbalance in our ecosystem. Right. Okay, coming closer home, you remember we have unfortunate situations that have happened in KZN in different places of our country, and we are now familiar with this concept. Right, we'll talk more about it in our lesson. These are floods. Okay, so we're saying floods, they also cause an imbalance in our ecosystem, and I believe you were able to identify those. Right, and then you can see there it's freezing, it's very cold, and we're saying that one we refer to our extreme temperature changes. Extreme temperature, let's just say extreme temperatures. Okay, our extreme temperatures, they can be very, very cold temperatures, as we see in that image, or they can be very, very hot temperatures, as we see there. So we're saying these are the top of our list of the natural factors that can cause an imbalance in our ecosystem. Right. I hope you were able to capture them. Now let's look at them in more detail, one by one. Let's start with our fires. Okay, our fires. When we look at our fires, number one, when the fires burn, all the trees and the grass are going to die, isn't it? And we're saying, looking at the trees, they provide a habitat, okay? That is a place of dwelling for your animals, for the birds, isn't it? So the moment you burn the trees, they no longer have shelter, okay? Remember we said our ecosystem has to provide what? Shelter, right? At the same time, we're saying there is loss of biodiversity. Remember, we're talking about the variety of plants and animals. And now, remember, when we're looking at our food web, there is different sources of food for different plants, for different animals. Okay, so the moment you destroy this biodiversity, you are destroying the different sources of food for both your primary consumers, even your secondary consumers. Okay, and as such, you upset the balance of your ecosystem, right? And chiefly, if you look at this part, the trees there that are actually burning, they're at the bottom of our energy pyramid. Remember? Okay, so now it means we're going to have less energy that is available for our primary consumers. Okay, so it means our primary consumers will die of hunger, isn't it? If our primary consumers die of hunger, what does it mean? It means our carnivores are also going to have a limited supply of energy from the primary consumers that they actually eat. You can see it's a chain, right? And in the same event, take note, when your fire burns there is some pollution. There is evolution of poisonous gases that may pollute our environment, that can kill many species that we have there in our environment. Right. I hope you were able to pick up some of those factors, some of those points that are as a result of our failed fires. Right. I hope that is making sense. There is a huge list that you can take note of the consequences of fires, right? And how they can actually cause an imbalance in our ecosystem. So, a major thing that we are identifying there, the loss of habitat. It means the animals are going to run, they're going to migrate, okay, to places where there's no fires. Okay, so when they migrate to those places that have no fires, you may realize now we will now have more animals in another smaller piece of what? Of land, which may cause more damage to the land where they actually run to, isn't it? And also remember the loss of biodiversity. So in other words, this is the loss of food generally for all your consumers. Okay, so the moment we do not have enough food, then our system does not have a balance. We have an imbalance now. Right, let us proceed to the next natural factor, drought. Okay, so during a drought season, we're saying there is not enough food for plants, for animals, isn't it? So we have losses in plant growth. You can see our plants, they are drying out. Okay, so it means the consumers have no sources of what? Of food. All right. So in the same vein, we're saying there will be increases in fire and insect outbreaks. Right. As you can see, as our plants are drying out, it means our insects now are going to thrive. Okay. The populations of insects will increase. Okay. And they now destroy more and more plants. Okay. And now we're saying there won't be enough food for all our trophic levels. And we're saying this will lead to an imbalance in our ecosystem, right? And then we're saying there will be changes now in the carbon and nutrient cycling. Remember our process of photosynthesis, this is being handled by our plants. Okay, so the carbon dioxide that we have in the atmosphere is going to be processed by our plants during photosynthesis. Now we're having fewer plants, so we're saying the nutrient recycling is going to actually what? Decrease, because we're now having fewer plants. Okay, and last but not least, we have the extinction of species. Remember, we said this is the complete disappearance of species. Some of the species will die totally. Okay, now because of the shortage of food, it can be in the form of plants. We're saying some typical herbivores or grazers, they can die, right? Because of shortage of what? Of food. And they can become extinct because they do not even have energy for them to reproduce. Right. I hope you are taking note of these points. Right. Another natural factor, we mentioned our unusual events. And in this case, we just singled out volcanoes. I hope we are familiar with the term a volcano, the volcanic eruptions. And you realize now, when the volcanoes occur, we can have permanent changes in our ecosystem. Why? Because your volcano is going to cause some eruptions that will lead to the evolution of ashes and lava, isn't it? And this can cause damage to our land there, and therefore we'll have some changes in our ecosystems, a shortage of food, also the loss of habitats for different animals. Okay, and this we're saying can lead to an imbalance, right? In this place, for our unusual events, we just highlighted volcanoes. I want you to think of different kinds of unusual events, okay, earthquakes and other things. How can they impact on the imbalance in our ecosystem, right? And remember, your imbalance, I want you to center on what our ecosystem provides. Our ecosystem provides shelter, our ecosystem provides food, our ecosystem provides water, it provides light. So we're saying all these provisions should be enough at each trophic level. The moment you have an imbalance, you're not having enough. Okay, so how do these impact, okay, on your ecosystem? So compile a list of other unusual events, cyclones. How do they impact on these provisions? Okay, and then you can discuss with your friends at a later stage. Right, now let us proceed. Okay, the other factor that we want to talk about is flooding. Okay, these are natural factors. Right, so what happens now during flooding? We're saying there will be erosion of soil. Okay, and we're saying, remember now, some of our animals, they live in the soil. Okay, they live underground. So whenever we have the soil erosion, there is now destruction of habitats. Okay, and due to the flooding now, our crops also gets damaged. Okay, some plants get damaged. So we have landslides taking place. Right, and in the same line, we're saying there will be pollution, as the pollutants will be carried by the water, isn't it, to the different ecosystems, even our marine ecosystems. Okay, even some animals now, your consumers, they can be washed away. All right, and so we have the death of our primary consumers. It means the secondary consumers are going to also suffer, isn't it? So we have the wiping away of our habitats and flora, that is our plants. Okay, our plants can also be washed away. So we have the elimination of our producers. Okay, so now we will have shortage of food. Okay, our producers also offer accommodation, or they offer habitats. You can call them habitats for our animals, isn't it? So whenever our animals now have lost their habitats, it means they have to migrate. And at the same time, the moment they lose the habitats, it puts them also in danger for what? For predation. They can easily now be attacked by other animals. Right? These are quite interesting points that you can take note of. Right? So as I said, ensure that you have identified our natural factors that cause an imbalance in our ecosystem. And as you meet later on, just sit down and look at their impacts. How do they affect the balance in our ecosystem? There's so many points that you can actually identify there. Right. I hope that is making sense. Right. The next factor that we want to talk about are the extreme temperature changes. Right. So we're talking of very, very low temperatures or very, very high temperatures. Right. Now, how do they cause our imbalance? In the event of very, very low temperatures, you can have reduced plant growth and survival. Right. So already we are at the first trophic level there. We have reduced the number of our producers. We have limited supply of food for our primary consumers. So our primary consumers are going to actually die because of what? Because of non-availability of food. Because we're saying the amount of vegetation that is available is now been reduced. There is not enough vegetation for our animals to actually feed on. All right. Even extreme high temperatures, they can also affect our ecosystem in different ways. So I'd like you to look at that section as an area of your research. How do the extremely high temperatures affect the balance of an ecosystem? How do they affect the balance of an ecosystem? Bearing in mind, you're thinking of the flow of energy in our ecosystem. Is there enough energy from one trophic level to the next trophic level? Right. I hope that is making sense. Now, that being said, we've come to the interesting part of our lesson. Now we want to see how much we have mastered until this point. A small activity there for you for what we have covered until now. Right, for this activity, I'm going to give you 5 minutes. Welcome back. Welcome back. Let us look at the questions together. So we're saying what disturbance is shown there in the ecosystem, and I believe we can tell that is a fire, isn't it? That is the disturbance in our ecosystem. And then we're saying, is this a natural factor or a human factor? It is important for us to realize that fires are both natural and even human factors. Natural in the sense of think of a lightning. Lightning can strike somewhere in the bush and trigger our veiled fire, okay? Or sometimes it can be as a result of human activities. All right, I hope you were able to get that one. And then we're saying, what is the effect of the disturbance on the environment? Okay, what we take note of is that the fires are going to actually burn down all the trees and our grass, right? There's so many ways you can actually put it. We know the effects of our fires on our environment, right? And then we're saying, what is the effect of the disturbance on the animals? Number one, we're saying our animals can be killed by the fires, okay? Or those that actually escape, they can actually migrate, okay, to other areas, right? So those are the effects that we have on the animals, right? I hope we have taken note of these activity of these different kinds of disturbances. Right. Now let us proceed with our lesson. Now we want to look at the human factors. Remember, we have looked at our natural factors. Now we have a different kind of factors there, which are our human factors. These which are done by men, right? And I'd like us to go over these factors together. Are you able to identify them? Let's go over the first picture. Right there, we have an elephant which is dead. Okay, what kind of activity is that? Okay, we can say hunting. Right, our hunting can be both legal, some can be illegal, and we can call that poaching. Okay, right. In line with these activities, I want to add fishing. All right, fishing. We'll explain why. So these are some of the human activities that cause an imbalance in our ecosystem. And there we can see some tractors there, and we can see what activities that is farming. I hope you are making your list of your activities, right? And we can see a very, very filthy place there, right? And that is pollution or human activity, right? I hope from today's lesson you ensure that you do not contribute to such images. Okay, let's avoid polluting our environment. Don't throw litter anyway, willy-nilly, anyhow. Okay, and then we go to the next image there. We can see they are chopping down trees for different activities, right? And that is, let's just call that deforestation. I hope you're taking note of these activities. Then last but not least there, what kind of human activity are we having there? Right, we can see heavy machinery there. Okay, that has to be mining. Right. So all these human activities were saying they have an impact on the balance of our ecosystem. Let us look at them one by one. Right. Let's start with hunting, poaching, or fishing. Right. Normally, you realize that when hunting is done or fishing is done, the result is that it will remove the reproductively mature individuals. Okay, so in other words, they are shooting animals or killing animals that are actually mature to reproduce. So it means what is left are only animals that are immature to reproduce and generate more offspring. It's not making sense. So what does that cause now? If it is uncontrolled, it means we're going to have the extinction of certain species, right? Those species, they get extinct and they're going to be removed out of our food chain. And therefore, that leads to what? It leads to our imbalance of our ecosystem. All right. So take note of what these activities they actually do to our species, right? And take note again that when this happens, when they shoot down some of these animals, for example, the elephants, it means now there will be fewer elephants that are there to destroy our vegetation, right? So it means the plants will start to thrive. Okay, so there is positive, there is as well as a negative impact. So I want you in your deliberations, when you discuss, when you take these further on, discuss on the positives as well as the negative impacts that can come about as a result of these activities. Right. The next one we want to look at is farming. Right. Farming. Right. Now, looking at farming, you realize if you look at that image, you cannot even see a single tree there. It's just a plain land, no tree. So what does it do? We're saying the trees are going to be cut down, or that you are eliminating the habitats of some animals, isn't it? Right? And therefore, these animals have to migrate to other areas. Okay? And then, because of that, you can see that we do not have biodiversity. The farm, normally, if it is a farm for onions, it will be onions throughout. Farm for something else, so we do not have biodiversity. Okay? It eliminates our biodiversity, and therefore we're reducing the different sources of food for the different animals at each trophic level. And in our farming, we're saying there is use of pesticides and the fertilizers that can destroy insects in different trophic levels. And we're saying some of those, if they are washed to fresh water bodies, those fresh water bodies can be poisoned, leading to the destruction of our marine ecosystems. Right. So these are some of the impacts that farming may have on our environment. Okay. Ensure that you are going to increase your list. The next activity we want to talk about pollution. You can see how filthy that water is. So our pollution can happen in water, in air, or in soil. And we're saying it reduces biodiversity, how it can lead to the death of the different species of, of animals. Okay, so when it comes to the water bodies, we're saying it causes an increase in algae. I'm sure you know the algae there, isn't it? And when the algae actually um, increases there in our water bodies, it can lead to the shortage of oxygen in our water bodies, leading to the death of fish and many other species that we have in our water. Right. I hope you're taking note of these factors. And then we have deforestation. Deforestation, we're eliminating the trees, and therefore we have reduced biodiversity. And remember, deforestation can come as a consequence of expansion of our towns and cities. Come to think of where you're staying now, there may be now complexes. Previously, it was a very big forest, isn't it? So, because of the chopping down of these forests, the trees, we're saying there will be reduced biodiversity. Our plants get what they get destroyed. Okay, and then we've got the loss of habitat for the different kinds of animals, right, as a result of our deforestation. And take note, the moment the trees are chopped down there, the other animals, they have no place now to hide. They easily become at risk of predation. Okay, a lion can easily spot an animal from a far off distance because there are no trees for those other animals to actually hide. So it is of what? Of predation. And therefore the lives of those other animals, they become what? They become high at risk. Okay, and therefore their numbers are likely to decrease. And we're saying there is also a reduction in the availability of food because we're destroying our producers, which are the trees. And now, the moment we remove the trees, again, we're saying we have an increase in soil erosion, washing away of our topsoil. And bearing in mind again, we have some animals that live in the soil, and therefore, if we wash away the soil, it means also they have loss of habitat. And then we have what we call increased greenhouse gases. Remember, we spoke of what we call carbon cycling. Okay, the carbon dioxide that goes in the atmosphere has to be taken by the plants for photosynthesis. Now we're saying the plants are not there. So we have the accumulation of the greenhouse gases in our atmosphere. Okay, last but not least, we talk of mining activities. Mining leads to deforestation, erosion, contamination of our water bodies, and many other effects. Right, now that being said, I'm just going to give you a minute for you to take down these points on mining. 1 minute. Right, welcome back. Welcome back. I hope you were able to take down all those points. Okay, you were able to take down all those points. Now, that being said, unfortunately, in the interest of time, we have come to the conclusion of our lesson for today. We're saying, remember, we said an ecosystem, it provides different resources to organisms such as food, water, light, and shelter. Right? And we said now, when our ecosystem provides enough of these resources, we say that it is a balanced ecosystem. However, we have natural and human disturbances that can actually upset this balance. And we're in the process of talking about how they actually affect the balance of our ecosystem. Right. Otherwise, that being said, I hope you found the lesson quite informative. Till we meet again, may God bless you.